introduces other risks that we didn't have before. All right, so that's a quick flyover of some of the things that we've been observing. Each one of those examples we've chosen because we think they express something in particular. The paper, we go into more detail, but again, a white paper is not really the place to describe those kinds of anecdotes because it's just changing too fast and happening too quickly. What we want to do instead is say that if we're looking at that holistically, what does it mean for our threat models? What does it mean for the body of things that we should be worrying about? And is that body of things different today than it was before the crisis emerged? So from all we're hearing, what really are the real threats that we should be focusing on, and how should we be responding to those threats? And the way we've approached it in the paper is to really look at it through three lenses. And we start off by saying, or by arguing that much of what we're dealing with now from a security point of view is really not new. The situation is unprecedented, but the technology is the same. The hackers haven't really changed. The vulnerabilities are the same. And so a lot of what we don't do in the paper is to go over those things again. We argue that that our focus should be to identify those places where our threat models have changed, and then prioritize the elements from within that subset to direct our activities at this time. The next thing we say is that there are some mitigating factors. There are some elements during this time that perhaps reduce the level of threat for us. I'm sad to say it's not much, but we shine a small ray of light by pointing out what some of those are, and I'll do that in this paper also. And then, of course, we talk about what the exacerbating factors are. So what are those things that have changed? In what ways have our threat models changed? And then we can focus on those changes to determine what our priorities should be from a security point of view. In terms of mitigating factors, I just want to point out two that we think are interesting. And the first is that attackers, of course, as you may have heard us say before, attackers are people too. And like us, they will also have friends and family. They will also fear falling sick. Some of them will be sick themselves. And of course, some of them have morals and ethics. They have codes. We may not agree with those codes, but they have them. And in these examples produced by Group IB and reported on Bleeping Computer, you see on some of the darknet forums, people having arguments about what kind of activity would be considered appropriate during this time, and what wouldn't, which sort of supports what we saw actors like Maze doing also. Another interesting example that IB Group reports is that in some cases, at least, some black market operators have been resorting to discounting. Now again, this may be opportunistic, like we saw with the encryptor earlier, but it may also suggest that there is some financial pressure on some of these marketplaces, and that business is not exactly booming for them, just like it's not booming for the rest of us. It's too soon to say whether this is going to have any marked impact. Certainly, it's something that my team and I will be watching going forward, and we hope to report some more data on that later. And then the other thing that's encouraging to watch, if my slides, there you go. The other thing that's encouraging to watch is how the cybersecurity community has rallied. And I've just given two examples here from the web of volunteer groups or articles about volunteer groups. But in the paper, we describe 4 or 5 of them that are standing up capabilities, threat sharing forums, crowdsourcing, advice platforms, emergency response, all kinds of things, security-related activities where people from the community, both commercial and open source and private volunteers, are rallying to counter the threat of cybercrime at this time. So there are some, there's some positive factors, and we describe some more of them in the paper also. But for today, we're going to focus sadly on what those exacerbating factors are. And in the paper, we have this infographic which really covers I think what the core elements are. There are some nuances that we describe in the text, but this is a good summary. The first thing we're saying is that your employees are more vulnerable at this time because they are psychologically more vulnerable. We were already really heavily predisposed to falling for scams and phishers and social engineering ploys. But at this time, with the heightened level of anxiety, we think it's fair to say that that characteristic of being human is going to be exaggerated. You, as a IT security operator, as a thinker, as a leader, you're going to have less control and less visibility over the systems you should be protecting than you are used to. So you are constrained in that way. Your users are going to be connecting from systems and environments that are probably fundamentally insecure, perhaps just at least haven't been given as much attention as your environments behind your corporate perimeters. It's very probable, and we've seen this with a number of clients, that they've had to implement or scale up remote access capabilities without having the time to do so as carefully as they would like. And as I said at the beginning, you and your team yourselves, our customers, are constrained and probably operating with diminished capabilities. So if we accept those sort of 5 realities as a summary, and again in the paper we go into much more and we present much more detail, then what I want to do for the majority of the time left to me is just to talk about ways you can think about responding to this crisis at this time. And I want to be clear, there's no customer is the same, no company is the same. It's just very hard to give generic guidance. So forgive us if any of it seems naive or obvious to you, but we've tried to sort of think generally about businesses and the sorts of things that they perhaps ought to be doing if their own priorities aren't already clear to them. And in the paper, we start off by sort of presenting this high-level taxonomy, sort of as a way of thinking, as a way of sort of introducing rationality into all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that's so prevalent at the moment. And the first is to say, look, don't panic. Avoid the hype, and recognize that even if things weren't the way you would have liked at the beginning of this crisis, there is time to improve. And we assess that one of the characteristics of this crisis, particularly with the way home users are connecting now, is that incremental changes will have an impact. Every improvement you make is probably going to contribute to a net improvement in security. And so doing small things is worthwhile. And the next point we make, as cynical as it may sound, is that we do think that the challenge of detecting and responding to breaches and compromises is going to be more difficult now than it would have been before the crisis. And so we're encouraging clients to think a bit about that, think a bit about the worst case scenario, and kind of revisit incident response plans and capabilities in light of the new reality. Next, and it's an obvious thing, is we're really encouraging people to talk gently and sensibly to their users about the change in the threat landscape at this time. Your users more than ever are going to be the first line of defense for you. You're going to need to co-opt them into your security programs by equipping them with knowledge and information and tools with which to make good decisions about what they open, what they don't, what they read, what they don't, what they forward, what they don't, even what they believe and what they don't. And so now is really a time to put programs and efforts into place to educate users. We're encouraging people to stay in touch with their partners. For many operators like us, it's business as usual. We have the ability to work remotely. We have the capacity. We believe we can support our clients, and there are many others like us too. So now is the time to form and strengthen partnerships. We need to work together at this time. And then because of that, the issue of supply chain attacks in particular, and because of just the high level of interdependency that we face, one of the things we're encouraging people to do is to reach out to their partner, supplier, supply chain ecosystem, and do what they can to ensure that their own business environment is also responding to the security component of this crisis in an appropriate way. What you do for yourself here is not going to be enough. You need your ecosystem to do what they can also. All right, and then finally, we make the point which I've made already, that now is the time to prioritize. That 80-20 is probably going to serve us quite well here. So we need to look at those things that have changed and focus on what the priority areas need to be for your given business. And so when we look at those priority areas, and we go through this in the paper at great length, we highlight 10 areas which we discuss in detail. I'm not going to dive into all of those areas now. I'm also not going to read you the slide. What I am going to do is I'm going to highlight a few of these and just point out some things that we think you should be considering at this time. And the first, as I've already said, is to think a little bit about your incident response procedures and systems, and make sure that they're appropriate now for this time, that you can deal with them remotely, that you have the tools in place, that people know where to report things, that you can do forensics remotely, etc. And in particular, given that we assess that ransomware and extortion type attacks are probably is going to be high up on your list of concerns, we're encouraging people to think about how they would deal with a ransom type incident. That's not just ransomware, the malware, but also extortion, DDoS extortion, etc. And one of the considerations you need to bear in mind there is whether in fact you may have to pay a ransom if you fall victim. And if you have to pay a ransom, how are you going to do that? Who's going to make the decision? How's the decision going to be made? Are you going to try and negotiate? Who will lead the negotiations? What kind of negotiation strategy will you have? And do you in fact have the currency you require to pay a ransom if that's what you're going to do? I'm not saying you should, but I definitely think it's something that needs to be considered when you're thinking about incident response at this time. I've already spoken about equipping your users. And here again, I want to say we want to inform and educate